Hey everybody, so back in 2022 I finally got around to doing a video on Hunt Showdown. The game had been out a few years at that point and I had finally gotten around to picking it up and messing with it. And it didn't really go well at all. If you're curious about how that went, I'll go ahead and link that video in not only the video description box, but also in the card things that come up on the screen here. But the game just received a huge update as of August 15th of this year, which included a significant update to the game engine, the CryEngine of course, as well as supposedly performance improvements for console, though since I'm not playing this on console I can't confirm or deny those, as well as a complete overhaul of the game's user interface, some pretty significant changes to gameplay mechanics, which includes a significant ballistic overhaul as well as the introduction of a centered point of aim, which should have been an option in the game when it launched 6 years ago, but they've finally included it as part of this big overhaul that has effectively rebranded and relaunched Hunt Showdown. It is now Hunt Showdown 1896 instead of just Hunt Showdown. Anyway, there's also some new content in the form of an entirely new map, which takes place in a completely different location than all of the previous ones. So instead of the action being confined exclusively to the bayous of Louisiana, it has now also moved into the mountains of Colorado. But more on that in a moment. There's also the introduction of a new boss monster called the Hellborn, as well as the kind of additional content you would more or less expect from any kind of game update for a live service title, more specifically stuff like new weapons, new modifications for your existing weapons, and some new cosmetics. Now obviously I'm not a Hunt Showdown YouTuber, I'm not a Crytek partner or any of that kind of crap, so I'm not going to get all bogged down in the minutia of the various stat tweaks that they've done, as well as things like what the new meta is, because frankly I don't give a single solitary crap about any kind of meta in Hunt Showdown, or really any game for that matter. But I do want to go over the things that I actively noticed while I was playing this compared to when I originally played it back in 2022, as well as of course the big changes they've made that pretty much anybody would notice regardless of whether they'd played this game much or not, as well as some of the issues that I've been seeing reported, as well as ones that I have personally experienced and ones that people I've been playing it with have personally experienced. So let's just go ahead and start with the general engine update, performance enhancements, that sort of thing. Like I said, they specifically cite that on PS5 and Xbox Series X, the game runs at native 4K and 60 FPS, which is quite impressive for a console title. And on Series S, it's 60 FPS at 2K. Like I also said, I cannot confirm or deny that because I don't have the console version and I don't have a PS5 or an Xbox Series X or S anyway, and I have absolutely no plans on getting any of them. So it's not something I could confirm anyway. What I can confirm, however, is that performance is kind of all over the place on PC right now. Let me just go through some of the things they specify in the update notes for this. So now the game runs on DirectX 12 as opposed to DirectX 11. That means that some people are going to experience better performance, whereas other people aren't. That's a highly rig-specific situation. In my particular case, I generally get better performance in most games when they're running on DirectX 12 versus DirectX 11, however they tend to be less stable on DirectX 12. In addition to the move to DirectX 12, they have also overhauled the lighting engine in the game to be more advanced, as well as water and hair shaders, and they also say that there are improvements across textures, environments, and animations, but I didn't really notice anything specific in that regard. And of course, there is also the elephant in the room. This update brought with it the additions of DLSS if you're running NVIDIA cards, and FSR if you're running AMD cards. And while that technology certainly has its uses, in general I'm seeing it more and more used as a crutch for developers who just don't want to optimize their game better or can't optimize their game better. And despite having a graphics card that is capable of using DLSS, I never actually use DLSS or FSR, and it's precisely because I want to know what the raw performance is like. I want to be able to just run the game at my monitor's native resolution, which is 1080p, and optimally I want it to get to frame rates that meet or exceed my monitor's refresh rate of 144 Hz. So when I talk about the performance here, I want you to understand that this is raw performance running on the hardware itself, No DLSS, none of that kind of trickery. Just running the game at 1080p on a Ryzen 9 5900X, 64 gigs of RAM, and an RTX 3080 12GB model. On that hardware, with those settings, the game runs well above 60 frames per second most of the time. However, when I record gameplay footage, I have the frame rate counter in the top right corner of the screen, and usually it gets recorded. In the case of Hunt Showdown, it did get recorded here as well. And you will probably notice that it only ever maxes out at 60 frames per second. This is because even though the game does run well above 60 frames per second, if I am running it with an uncapped frame rate, it also causes my graphics card to get extremely hot, not just to the point where it becomes incredibly uncomfortable for me to try to keep playing the game, but also to the point where the card gets dangerously close to thermal throttling, which, if you're not familiar with the concept, is when the system detects that either a graphics card or a processor, or sometimes even the memory itself, is reaching an operational temperature that is too high, the point where it will basically start damaging the components. And so in order to get those temperatures back down to manageable and safe levels, the system will automatically underclock whichever chip or card is the problem in order to force that heat back down to a more acceptable level. Now, best case scenario in this is it underclocks it just a bit and you only lose a few frames per second in performance. Most of the time, though, if your temperatures are getting to the point where it will start thermal throttling, you're going to see significant drops in performance, and in the worst case scenarios, it'll shut down the computer entirely. Obviously, that's a really bad thing. You do not want thermal throttling at all, and you definitely don't want it thermal throttling to the point where it shuts down the computer entirely. So when I was running this thing with an uncapped frame rate and noticing the temperatures getting really hot, well past the point where it would start thermal throttling, I decided to lower the graphics settings down to very high and institute a frame rate cap of 60, and that seems to have fixed the problem. It still gets pretty hot when the game's running, especially for longer periods of time, but at the very least it doesn't get up to dangerous levels. Now obviously thermals are going to be something that's entirely up to your individual rig. What hardware you're running, what kind of case you have, how many fans in your case you have, whether you're using a liquid cooling setup or not. That's all far too variable for me to be able to give you any kind of definitive statement on this, but what I can tell you is that in my particular system, with my case, with the amount of fans that I've got in it, in order to prevent thermal throttling, I have to run the game with a cap of 60 frames per second. And at nearly all times, if I'm running it with that cap of 60 FPS at very high settings at 1080p, it is effectively locked at 60 frames per second at all times. Except when it isn't. What do I mean by that? Well, most of the time, the game runs at effectively a locked 60 frames per second. There might be a frame or two of frame rate fluctuation here or there, but generally it is effectively locked at 60 frames per second. However, I do experience an odd issue that I'm showing you a clip of right now, where when I approach a target's lair, sometimes the frame rate just absolutely tanks, and it pretty much stays that way until I get out of the match, quit the game, and restart it. And then after I've restarted the game and go back in, the performance is back to rock solid 60 frames per second at nearly all times. Now, I don't have conclusive proof of this, but based on the limited amount of research that I've done on this, I think what might be happening there is a VRAM-specific memory leak. In other words, a memory leak specific to graphics card memory, not to system memory. That would certainly explain why the issue starts in-game and it doesn't go away unless I completely close out the game and restart it. Because when you close out the game, that's going to clear out all the VRAM that it was previously using, and when you go back into the game, it's going to start using up the VRAM again until eventually it hits the point where it maxes out the VRAM again and you have to restart the game and so on and so forth. Again, I don't have definitive proof, but that seems the most likely culprit of what's going on there, and regardless of what the actual problem is there, it's an issue that Crytek definitely needs to fix. Because frame rate degradation like that is a nasty problem in any game, but it's especially nasty in an extraction shooter like Hunt Showdown, where any kind of significant frame rate drop can cause you to lose your character and all of the gear and traits that they have. So anything that causes sudden dramatic frame rate drops like that needs to be fixed ASAP, and as of this video, it's about 2 weeks after the update released, and we still don't have a fix for it. They did, however, put out a fix for an issue that a lot of people were having, but I never personally encountered, which was that whenever you would try to open the map screen, it would just turn into a black screen and you couldn't see the map. So if you closed that, then you would be back in the game. Although some people were having freezing issues during this process as well, where they would try to go to the map screen and it would freeze the game. I did encounter a game freeze at one point. I was just wandering around doing stuff, and then suddenly the game froze. And the only thing the player could do at that point was to close the game via Task Manager and then restart it and try to reconnect to the match, and hopefully that goes well. So that was another major issue, but they do seem to have fixed that. But there are also a variety of other odd glitches and occasional performance issues here and there. There's a lot of pop-in problems. The shaders sometimes glitch out so that shadows don't work properly. And on certain people's systems, apparently the game has some issue with the way the lighting system works, so it just renders the game so dark they can't actually see anything. So there's definitely a lot of weird technical issues that were introduced with this update, most of which haven't been fixed yet. Although, thankfully, most of them aren't really that big of a deal. I mean, stuff like the weapon pop-in in first-person view isn't really that big of a deal. Now, if there were a pop-in issue with other players or with the various AI-controlled monsters that roam the world, then I could see that being a problem, but I haven't really seen any reports of that. Just odd, annoying graphical issues more than anything else. But aside from all of these technical issues that I've already gone over, there is kind of the elephant in the room as far as the engine upgrade and performance goes, which is that as of the update, the game's system requirements have also changed, which has resulted in a fair few people with lower-end systems no longer being able to play the game that they purchased and were able to play previously. And even for the ones who are still able to play it, the performance is so terrible that the game is effectively unplayable anyway. Meanwhile, of course, mid-range systems saw a pretty sizable drop in performance, although there are some tweaks you can make to the graphics settings and such that will compensate for that somewhat. But the fact remains that unless you were already running a pretty high-end system to begin with, this big 1896 update, which promised significant performance improvements on console, ended up performing considerably worse across a wider variety of PC configurations. And on the one hand, I understand the need to update the system requirements because of introducing all these new features. That makes sense from a technical standpoint. From a customer service perspective, though, it completely screws over the people who can't afford to upgrade their PCs. And as far as I'm concerned, if somebody has bought a copy of a game that they are no longer able to play because an update has rendered it unplayable for them by increasing the system requirements, they should be entitled to a refund because they can no longer use the product that they bought through no fault of their own. After all, it's not like somebody buys a game expecting it to, in, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, suddenly have a spike in the system requirements that renders the game unplayable for their current system. Now, of course, whether they'd actually be able to get a refund from Steam and Crytek on that is another matter entirely, especially for people who've put potentially hundreds or even thousands of hours into the game already. But again, as far as I'm concerned, if you have been kicked out of being able to play the game entirely, even though you were able to play it previously just because of an update that got pushed, you should be able to get a refund for that game. Anyway, that's enough about performance and technical issues for the time being. They're mostly manageable. There are a few that really need to be fixed as soon as possible, performance issues, crashing problems, things like that. But this update was about much more than just an engine update. There was also a ballistic system overhaul that introduces some very significant projectile drop at range, which seems to disproportionately affect weapons that use long ammo much more than weapons that use medium or compact ammo. This is especially strange because the weapons that fall into the category of using long ammo are generally the ones that you would expect to be reaching out and hitting things quite well at very long ranges. Stuff like the Lebel rifle, the Berthier, the Mosin Nagant, the Krag Jorgensen, the Sharps rifle. These weapons that use full-power rifle cartridges and in real life are well known to be able to reach out to hundreds upon hundreds of meters away, whereas stuff like Winchester 73s use pistol caliber rounds, or the Vetterli rifle uses more of an intermediate rifle round, which only makes them effective for mid to close range engagements. So what you would expect if you know anything about how firearms work is for the pistols and, of course, weapons that use pistol caliber rounds like the Winchester 73 would be most severely affected by the bullet drop mechanics, that they would have to compensate much more, whereas those that use long ammo, so proper full power rifle rounds, would be much less affected by it, but that's not really how it ends up working. You can see in the footage that I'm showing you here that I have an easier time hitting things at very long ranges with the Winchester 73 compared to stuff like the Mosin Nagant, the Krag, the Lebel, and so on and so forth, simply because the Winchester 73 is depicted as having far less bullet drop than those other guns do. Now, you can compensate for that somewhat by equipping certain long ammo guns with Spitzer rounds instead of the standard round nose ammunition that they use, and that will narrow the bullet drop curve so that you can reach out to further distances without the bullet drop being quite as severe. But no matter how you slice it, it just doesn't really make any sense. Pistol caliber rounds are not going to be reaching out to 200-ish meters with barely any bullet drop. And even round-nosed ammunition in those full-power rifle rounds is still not going to be having significant bullet drop at the same distance. Now, obviously, weapon statistics in a video game aren't necessarily going to be entirely based on realism, and it's certainly not in the case of something like Hunt Showdown, where you're dealing with supernatural entities, but this is one of those gameplay mechanic decisions that just doesn't make any sense, really, no matter how you slice it. And it really just comes across more like an attempt at nerfing long ammo guns when used for sniping, because that's actually what people mainly use them for, due to the muzzle velocities of the long ammo guns being considerably higher than medium and compact ammo guns. You see, prior to the introduction of bullet drop, they still had muzzle velocity in the game, but all it affected was the time it took for your shot to reach out to different distances. So if you were doing long-range shooting, then a lower muzzle velocity meant that you had to lead your target a lot more to be able to hit them than if you were using something that had a higher muzzle velocity. Thus, long ammo guns ended up being kind of the meta if you were trying to play as a sniper, because they just had higher muzzle velocities, meaning you didn't have to lead your targets as much. Now, however, you have to compensate for bullet drop with a long ammo gun more than if you were using a especially compact ammo gun, but even to a lesser degree, the medium ammo guns. Those are still affected fairly significantly by bullet drop, but it's not quite as much of a problem for medium ammo guns because, generally speaking, people aren't going to be using them to snipe anyway. And that's just a function of them having relatively low muzzle velocity. Now, there was one other major change to the ballistic system and the gunplay, and that is that any headshot, regardless of what you're using, will now instantly drop a player. Doesn't matter what the damage value of your weapon is. That only matters for calculating damage for anything that is not a headshot. This, of course, has a few effects. The first is that it makes any weapon viable, regardless of what ammo type it is, regardless of how crap it was seen as before. If you can get a headshot with it, you can be successful with it. This in turn encourages players to use just whatever they feel like using, as opposed to feeling like they have to pick a certain so-called meta loadout if they want to have successful runs. Obviously, that's a good thing. It encourages players to experiment with different loadouts and just find something that they personally enjoy using. On the other hand, it does contribute a bit to making sniping more difficult and slightly less useful, and it can also make gunfights feel very slightly more random. For example, if you were getting into a gunfight with somebody and previously they would get a headshot with a compact ammo gun that doesn't do all that much damage, you would still survive that shot and be able to get away, get some healing, get back into the fight, or maybe even drop them with a well-timed follow-up shot of your own. Whereas now, if they get a lucky headshot in, it ends the fight instantly, and they can either move on to other targets, or the fight's just over instantly and they can move on to doing other things. The thing is, situations like that were going to be pretty rare anyway, so it's not really something you're ever going to notice while you're playing. So bullet drop ends up being a more or less ambivalent feature. You can kind of take or leave it. The headshot change ends up being largely positive, but the change to the gunplay that actually makes the biggest difference, at least for me anyway, is the centered point of aim. Something that, again, should have been in the game from the very beginning 6 years ago, but no, they decided to go with a lowered point of aim for those past 6 years, and Hunt fans were trying to justify it as, oh, well, it's more immersive, you can see more of the screen with the lowered point of aim. Well, guess what? With a centered point of aim, people who play any other first-person shooter on the market can now actually hit things when they play Hunt Showdown, instead of constantly having to fight their muscle memory gained from years, or in my case, decades, of using a centered point of aim. Not to mention the fact that your eyes are naturally drawn to the center of the screen anyway, so a centered point of aim is the most logical and most comfortable point of aim for any first-person shooter, or even a third-person shooter. And much like I said in my original video on Hunt Showdown, if you prefer a lowered point of aim, that's fine, but it should be a toggleable option in the menu instead of the default and only option. You should have options for centered point of aim and lowered point of aim. And now they have exactly that, and in fact, centered point of aim is now the default option. You have to specifically choose a lowered point of aim. Really, the only downsides are as follows. First, the weapons on screen are really big, but they were already really big on screen in lowered point of aim anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. And second, that it took Crytek 6 friggin' years to put such a no-brainer feature in the game, all the while trying to justify it by saying, well, we made a design decision and we've decided to stick with it, and having their fan base basically gaslighting people into either not playing the game or adapting to the lowered point of aim just for Hunt, because apparently Hunt is special and it really benefits from that lowered point of aim. Well, guess what? Now that I'm playing it with a centered point of aim, I can still see everything on the screen just fine. It looks fine. The difference is, now I don't have to constantly rethink where I'm aiming because I know that my shots are going to go generally right where I'm used to aiming. And you know what the really weird thing about this is? It seems like such a simple change. Something that couldn't possibly have any kind of profound effect on gameplay, and yet it completely turned the experience around for me. Because now, instead of constantly fighting my muscle memory and instincts developed over, again, decades of playing first-person shooters, now I don't need to worry about all that. I can just focus on what makes Hunt, Hunt. Of course, it certainly doesn't do anything about the other issues the game has had over the years, but at the very least, a significant barrier to entry has now been removed. Hunt fans act like it wasn't a significant barrier, but it really was. Anyway, very positive change there, but now I need to balance out the positivity with some things that are more of a mixed bag, as well as some just outright negatives. So, mixed bag. The new map with the new boss. So the new map is Mammon's Gulch. It is set in Colorado as opposed to the maps that the game previously had, which were all set in the bayous of Louisiana. So very refreshing change of scenery, different location, same kinds of monsters you're fighting for the most part, with the exception of the brand new Hellborn, which is basically a souped-up boss monster version of the Immolator. Effectively, really big, tanky, fiery zombie that launches lava at you. Hellborn is the second of what is referred to as a wild target, meaning that unlike with the standard targets, which are Scrapbeak, Butcher, the Spider, and Assassin, where you have to go around the map and find clues scattered around there to narrow down where that particular target is, and once you've narrowed down that target, you go into their lair, take them down, banish them, grab the bounty, and then extract with it. In the case of a wild target like Hellborn, there aren't any clues to find, and there's not really a lair to find either. The wild targets are just placed somewhere on the map, and you have an alternate method of finding them. In the case of Hellborn, when you go into Dark Sight, every, I believe, 10 seconds or so, there is a loud roar that comes from wherever Hellborn is located, and you have to basically echolocate Hellborn. So you listen to where that sound is coming from, and you go there until eventually you find Hellborn. Pretty cool idea. Hellborn himself is a bit of a pushover boss, honestly. He's very easy to deal with, but thematically is pretty cool. And unlike the main targets, he only drops one bounty, and you don't have to banish him first. Once you've dropped him, you can just pick up the bounty and head to the extract. So Hellborn has some pretty unique mechanics associated with him, and is generally a pretty solid addition to the lineup. The map Mammon's Gulch itself is also quite solid. It's absolutely gorgeous to look at. It's meticulously detailed, and is definitely a nice change of scenery if you've been playing the game for years and have just gotten used to the bayou. That said, it is also currently the only map available in Hunt Showdown because they removed all 3 of the other ones. So while it is a nice change of scenery compared to the other maps, there is now absolutely no map variety at all. There is only Mammon's Gulch, and if you don't like Mammon's Gulch, well, tough. Now, supposedly they are reworking the maps and will be bringing them back to the game once they've reworked them with the new engine features and such, but it remains to be seen how long that will take. I imagine that Mammon's Gulch will be the only map available at least as long as the Scorched Earth event is currently going on, but who knows how long it will take after that for the maps to be added back in. It could be something that gets added back in as soon as the event is over. It could take weeks, months, or with Crytek, considering it took them 6 years to put a centered point of aim in the game, who knows, it could take years for the maps to be added back into the game. But again, supposedly they are reworking them and will be bringing them back eventually, which is something they will desperately need to do because by the time the Scorched Earth event is over, I imagine pretty much everyone will be absolutely sick of Mammon's Gulch. And unfortunately, the maps weren't the only thing they removed from the game. They have completely axed the entire Trials system, which was basically what passed for single-player content in Hunt Showdown. It was a bunch of very specific gameplay scenarios that you played through as a single player, and completing them would unlock various rewards. Now, of course, the trials weren't exactly great content, but they were something for you to do in single player that didn't require you to be playing against other players, because people tend to forget Hunt Showdown is very much a PvP game, way more than a PvE game, whereas other extraction shooters are generally pretty equal measures of PvP and PvE. And it allowing you to get various rewards for completing these various trials was definitely appreciated. But rather than retooling the trials to make them more interesting and engaging, they just removed them entirely. And given Crytek's previous and current focus on the game, I wouldn't expect any kind of trials to return, and nothing to replace it either. No sort of single-player campaign, no sort of single-player story missions to play through that are based on the events that are occurring. Just absolutely no single-player content outside of the 2 tutorial missions that are available to you. And that is an absolute shame, because a single-player campaign set in the Hunt Showdown universe sounds like a recipe for success, and Crytek seems to have absolutely no interest in doing something like that. Presumably because they think there's absolutely no money in it, and they would rather just make even more cosmetics for you to buy. But as if removing the trials and the other maps weren't enough, they also removed every last bit of long-running lore from the game. You see, the way the lore was conveyed to the player was admittedly a fairly boring method of the Book of Monsters and the Book of Weapons. And as you continue to eliminate all of the basic monsters, stuff like grunts, hives, armored, etc., as well as the targets themselves, butcher, assassin, and so on, then you would gradually be filling in lore entries on these various monsters. Same kind of thing went for the weapons. As you continued to use the weapons and gain experience with them, you would gradually unlock lore entries that were associated with them, and all of this would help you to understand more about the world of Hunt Showdown, these strange supernatural things going on, various characters that might be available as premium skins, or even just characters that you might unlock by playing the game normally. And frankly, the information itself, the lore itself, is actually really interesting. It's just that the way it is conveyed to the player is really boring, because it was all tucked away in a section of the menus that Crytek almost seemed embarrassed by, because you really had to go out of your way to get to that interface, and the way you actually unlock the lore entries was just a slow, tedious grind, even though it was just playing the game normally that would allow you to unlock these various entries. But the lore itself, and the way it's actually presented in that section of the menus, is actually really interesting. It was presented as if it were an ongoing research project by somebody more in the modern day looking back on the Louisiana incident and trying to make sense of all of it. And they were having to try to piece together the truth of matters through often very unreliable sources, things like people's personal journal entries or pulp stories written about the things that they're trying to research, or letters, or even newspaper clippings, things that gave the setting a feeling of weight, like they actually put some effort into developing a proper setting with the goings-on of the times in mind. It really does feel like stuff that was taken from that time period and trying to piece together actual information about it from a more modern perspective. Really cool. And of course Crytek decides to just completely remove it with this new update, and there's no telling if they will ever put it back in the game in any form. They cited low player interaction with those menus as the main reason for doing it, but that's mostly because first, it just took so long to unlock lore entries that people probably didn't even pay attention to them, and more importantly, the Book of Monsters and the Book of Weapons were both tucked away in interfaces that you specifically had to go out of your way to get to, instead of something that was more front and center. Instead of giving the impression of, hey, we have all of this lore stuff that we're really proud of and we want you to learn more about, because Hunt Showdown is more than just a multiplayer first-person shooter. It has a setting, it has lore, it gets complicated, and it's really cool. And instead of calling attention to it and clearly being proud of it, it's almost like Crytek were ashamed of it. They had it tucked away in interfaces you had to specifically go out of your way to get to. The interfaces themselves weren't especially intuitive to begin with, and the process for unlocking those lore entries was just too slow and tedious. And rather than retooling that system to make it more accessible and retooling the interface to bring more attention to it and say, hey, look, we're proud of this stuff, Crytek just said, no, we're just going to remove it from the game, and we may or may not bring it back. Oh, and to make matters worse, there's no compendium of event lore in the game either. The only way I can see that you can earn event lore is by leveling up your battle pass and gradually unlocking the story chapters that are available throughout various levels of the battle pass. And all that gives you is an audio log with a transcription that is only available in the story menu of the event itself. And from the way things look right now, it seems like once the event's over, they're just gonna remove that from the game and you won't be able to view those lore entries either. Now, I hope I'm wrong on that. I hope they keep this lore in the game, and I hope they bring back the lore they previously excised from the game, just with a more intuitive interface and a better method for unlocking it. But I really can't shake the gut feeling that they're just not going to do that. And if that's the case, I really hope that the Hunt Showdown fanbase continues to compile the lore so that it doesn't get lost. Because, like I said in this video and in the previous video even, it's an interesting setting that I want to see more of, I want to learn more about. I would love to have a single-player experience set in the Hunt Showdown universe, but it seems like Crytek is just unwilling to give that to us. Unfortunately, that's just one of those time will tell things, and time has never been one of Crytek's strong suits. I know I keep harping on this point, but again, it took them 6 years to put in one of the simplest changes that could have made the game more accessible to a huge variety of people. 6 years just to put in a centered point of aim. And apparently the price for adding a centered point of aim was removing all of the single-player content entirely, removing all of the lore entries from the game almost entirely except for the current event stuff, and removing all of the previous maps that were available. And frankly, as good as the centered point of aim change is, that's a terrible deal. But there was one particular change this update brought that has been way more controversial than anything I've talked about up to this point. And that was the overhaul to the game's interface. And in order to discuss that, I am going to switch over to live commentary so I can actively show you how it all worked out. Alright folks, let's try to break down the big UI update that came from the 1896 update. So we're just going to start at the top of the screen and work our way down. And I do have a gamepad plugged in, as you can see here by me switching to the gamepad controls, and I can switch back and forth. So that's partly why I did it, so I can show you whether this is actually better for gamepad players or not. So we're just going to start at the top and work our way down. So over here you just have some quick stats, nothing crazy. Hunt dollars, blood bonds, that's the premium currency. Rank, that's your player level, and then prestige level, if that matters to you, of course. So those are all displayed up here. Then you got in the middle here, you got a bunch of categories. Home, which is just the main menu. Hunters, gear, battle pass, and store. Over here you got your party menu. This is your chat menu if you happen to be in a party. It's saying that I have 2 unread messages because I was in the middle of a match and somebody actually used the text chat in my vicinity, and now this won't go away. So yeah, that's some great programming there. Anyway, then we got our options button, and then we got our quit button. Pretty straightforward, everything makes sense. Then we move down to this middle section here. We've got Scorched Earth ends in 39 days. That tells you about the current event that's running. Nothing crazy there. Then you got Battle Pass Upgrade Now. If I click on that, nothing happens. I don't know why it says Upgrade Now right here, but that's just the way it's set up. It's kind of dumb, whatever. And we scroll over to here. I mean, obviously in the middle here we have just information about whatever button is selected, but over on this side we have a quick menu. So if I wanted to go to, say, progression, I could just click on that and go down to here. Okay, that's fine. If I go to last mission stats, that's up here. Okay, that's all sensible, but kind of pointless because I can just do this. That's the scroll wheel. I can just scroll to whatever I want very quickly and very easily. And of course, if I'm on a keyboard and mouse, I can just quickly and easily select whichever button I want to. So this over here is kind of pointless for keyboard and mouse. Is it any better for a gamepad user? Let's find out. Well, on my Xbox controller here, it shows left trigger being the button for that. So how does this work? Do I just press it? Do I press and hold it? Let's try if I press and hold it. Okay, it showed up and then went away. Let me try it again. Okay. That time I let go of the button and it popped up. If I press it and let go, it comes back and... yeah, this button is... this menu is very finicky if you're on a gamepad, but once you're on it, then you can, of course, go between these various sections here, and that makes things quick and easy, right? Well, it's kind of pointless on this menu here too, because as you can see, I'm moving left and right on this one, but I can just scroll up and down anyway. So that entire side menu is completely pointless. Utterly baffling. Before we go on to anything else here, I want to address the scrolling of this menu. So we have our play menu here. We have our 2 main modes, Bounty Hunt and Soul Survivor. Then we got the shooting range. Now over here is tutorial. Now if I want to access the tutorial, then you can see it's partially off screen here. Why is that? Well, in their infinite wisdom, they decided to have a whole bunch of space over here, but have everything just kind of trail off to the right. Odd way of doing things, but if you think about it, they've more or less based the design after the streaming service UIs that you will see in stuff like Netflix and Hulu and all that. It's a very dumb way to do it for a PC and console game. Doesn't actually make the interface any more usable, and in fact, it leaves a lot of waste. Let me show you how that works. So, as you can see, we've got an arrow here. That's our scroll arrow. If I click on that, you can see there is absolutely nothing to the right of tutorial. So I have to put this scroll all the way over here just to access the tutorial. Except I don't, because I can also just click on it directly and then it will scroll over to exactly the space that apparently the user interface needs in order to allow the tutorial button to be selectable. So I have to click it twice just to get into this menu. And then in this menu there are just 2 buttons, and it's the exact same interface as the previous menu, just with these 2 buttons instead of the previous one.
Why is this even here? Why do we need a button for a tutorial menu if it only brings us to this? Why can't those just be over here? Why can't we just have basic and then advanced tutorial right then and there? Or if you want to be clever about this UI, maybe have the buttons set up to where if you hover over tutorial, then it shows two buttons, one for basic, one for advanced, and you could easily select it that way. Nope, can't do that. Gotta go into an extra menu here. Gotta have extra clicks. Gotta have waste. Okay, fine. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Crytek. Now then, let's see if it's any easier on a gamepad. Well, I gotta scroll over. So, not really any easier. Press A to open this menu. I'm still having to do extra button presses to get into this menu. You may wonder, well, what's the actions menu do? If you even notice that in the bottom right of the screen, by the way. Well, that just allows me to select the exact same buttons that are visible on the screen that are big and large and obtrusive. Big and large, yeah. Live commentary, folks. Yeah, this actions menu is functionally pointless in nearly all of the menus it's in. There are a few exceptions. They're very rare. So most people are probably going to take a look at this and say, oh, this is the exact same menu except I have to press an extra button to bring it up. Why bother? And then they'll forget about it and they'll just use the other menus. Again, waste extra button presses for no reason. Now then, we scroll down, we see that this only has 3 options, which means that there's still space over here, but at least it all fits on one screen and you don't have to scroll. Here they could just shrink the buttons. Is all that button space really necessary? No, of course it's not. The game would be just fine if you had just a text option, or a text menu instead. But no, we gotta have these big buttons because apparently whoever they got to do the interface for this thinks that a Netflix or Hulu style interface is perfectly fine or outright preferable for PC and console game. It's not. Anyway, we keep scrolling down. Now here's where things get really wacky. So, welcome to the Battle Pass section, because of course it has a Battle Pass. But you notice here we have progression, story, details, and Battle Pass. Now I'm going to go into story first because there's nothing here. It's just Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4, blah blah blah. So this is what it displays if you haven't unlocked a chapter. Unlock requirement, event level 17. Event levels are the Battle Pass levels. So I've unlocked up to Chapter 4 right now. They're just audio logs, and you don't even need to listen to them. They have the text right there. Not exactly an engaging way to tell a story. It was played out back when System Shock 2 did it. Anyway, yeah, far be it from me to have a played out thing in 2024 that was played out as far back as 1999. Anyway. Details, what is this about? Well, this tells you more about the Scorched Earth event. Okay. What pledge marks do, what packs do, what you get event points for doing. Okay, that's all straightforward there. So, what about progression and Battle Pass? Well, if I click on Battle Pass, you'd expect me to pull up the Battle Pass with all the levels in it, but that's not what comes up. What comes up is the screen which you use to purchase the Battle Pass. Okay. So what about progression? Oh, that's where the Battle Pass stuff is. So this is Battle Pass progression. They just label it progression because, of course, they do. Now, if you're on PC, of course, you have this scroll arrow. You can just click on that to view what you want. So let's say I want to take a look at this. Okay. I click on it. It comes up. I can even move it around. The 3D object, I mean. I see what it is. It gives me a description. This just tells you what your current progress is. Okay, pretty straightforward. That's not too bad. It's a bit cumbersome, but it's not too bad. Now, if I want to do this on gamepad, well, that's not very helpful. Okay, so the actions menu is still pretty useless. Don't worry, we'll come back to upgrade Battle Pass in a moment. So, if I want to go directly to it, now I have to scroll all the way over. Now I'm just holding the analog stick, and I gotta find where it is. Oh, there it is right there. Now I can view it. And I can still rotate this with the right stick instead of the left stick. However, it's way more cumbersome to do this on a gamepad than it is on keyboard and mouse. Now then, what happens if I go into this and select Upgrade Battle Pass? Well, that brings me back to this menu. So, exact same menu you saw before. Okay, fine, whatever. That's not horribly unreasonable. But then we scroll down. We have the store. So, you can buy Blood Bond packs, which again, premium currency. You can buy bundles. Or you can go into the Battle Pass and get to the exact same screen as under the previous section. So that's, what, 3 ways to get to this screen now? And of course, 4 if you count that, or 5 or whatever. I don't even know at this point, but you have so many different ways of getting to this same menu that are just wasteful. Why do you need it here and here? Why can't you just have it down here? And then when you have this menu, you can get rid of that button because it's completely pointless and extra. You can just have it here. And then when you're in the progression here, if you want to upgrade the Battle Pass, you have a button that says Upgrade Battle Pass. Like press and hold X over here down in the bottom left corner, or in the case if I'm on keyboard and mouse, just press the G key and it'll bring that menu up. In fact, I'll show you. See? It just brings this up. Okay, cool, fine. That's not that bad, but like, having multiple buttons for the same thing on the same menu is just, it's awkward. Unnecessary. And that's the thing about this interface update. Most of the changes were actually just superfluous changes that add extra clicks, extra sub-menus for no discernible reason. Or they're just unintuitive to begin with. So let's go into the Dark Tribute. Now, I wanted to record this after I'd actually unlocked something in the Dark Tribute so you can see what I'm talking about here. So welcome to the Dark Tribute screen. This is your daily rewards thing. As you can see, when you reach certain experience point thresholds, you unlock a reward. Now, if you're on keyboard and mouse, you can see I can highlight this button here, and I can click on it, and it would allow me to claim the reward. Or I can press F to claim the reward automatically. What about if I'm on a gamepad? Well, I'm pressing a whole bunch of stuff. It's not letting me select claim reward. I'm pressing A. It's not claiming the reward. If I want to claim the reward with a gamepad, I have no choice but to press the X button. And I have to see it down here in the bottom left of the screen to know that that is the button I need to press. It's not displayed on the claim reward button. It's not displayed anywhere else on the screen except that one small bit of text down at the bottom left. Now, if I'm on PC, right in front of my monitor, that's not a big deal. If this were on a TV across the room, I may not even really notice that. Now, if I go into the Actions menu, there's only one option. It's Claim Reward. Why is this even here again? So let's claim the reward. In fact, I'm just going to click on it like I just told you about. Oh, I get some extra experience points. Whoop-de-doo. It's a random reward every time. Kind of pointless, really, but anyway. That gives you an idea of the level of not really making this more intuitive for gamepads or really anyone that they're going to with this. Now, let's say I go into the weapon progression here, so you can see I have everything displayed. Stuff that's locked, stuff that's unlocked, doesn't matter. Your filters are up here at the top. Now, if you're on keyboard and mouse, you can just select them. Hide locked, select medium weapons. Okay, no big deal. Now, things get wacky once you start applying more filters. So we're going to hide locked. We're going to select long ammo. So these are all the weapons that use long ammo that I have available, that I have unlocked. Now I'm going to select, let's say, poison. This means that I can equip poison rounds to these. Well, the thing about that is that any logical person using this interface would see, oh, hide locked, long, poison. That would mean only the long ammo using weapons that can have poison ammunition that I have unlocked. And yet, here's a weapon that I have that's locked, but it's visible because I happen to have one from completing either a weekly or one of the daily things. I can't remember exactly how I got it. I know it was either a weekly or a daily, though. But it's locked because I haven't completed the unlock requirement of earning 900 XP with any Martini Henry variant. So that's already broken that just because I have one in the inventory. If I didn't have one in the inventory, then this wouldn't show up. But still, it's messy. Now we have long ammo. Well, here's the thing. Berthier, that's long ammo. Infantry, 73. The 73s are small ammo. The Centennials are medium ammo. That's a crossbow. It uses a different ammo type entirely, as is that hunting bow. And then, of course, these Nagant revolvers and such, they all use small ammo. What this is doing... Well, here's another one that's locked for me. What this is doing is it is not displaying the long ammo weapons that are capable of equipping poison rounds. It is displaying long ammo weapons and weapons that are capable of equipping poison rounds. And if I add flames, then that's going to add even more things. It's not going to narrow things down further like you would expect filters to do. Now, there was a really annoying issue on day 1 of the new update that whenever I would go in to just take a look at the item here, so let's say go to item details, I would go to a screen like this to get more information about the item. And even here I can complain about stuff I'm not going to at the moment. But I would go into this, and then I would come back to this, and all of the filters would be reset every single time I would do something like that. Incredibly annoying having to just constantly go back and find stuff and reapply filters and such. They fixed that day 1, though, thankfully. Still plenty of work to be done with this menu, though. For example, if I want to equip a hunter here, I go to the hunter menu. Let's just use Maria here. Go into the menu for various weapons. Okay, how exactly do I equip a weapon? Well, the logical thing to do would have a menu set up to where you have the slot, or multiple slots, and then you have a grid showing all the different items that you have unlocked and such. And you could just click and drag them. That's not how they've done it. Instead, they've decided that the best way to do this is to make it unintuitive and nonsensical. So let's say I want a baseball bat. Okay, cool. How do I equip this? I don't see an equip button anywhere. Select, what does that mean? Does that mean I just get more information about it? Does it mean I bring up the item details screen like this? Is that what select does? I mean, obviously if I have the buy option here, then that means I spend hunt dollars and I buy it and it goes into my inventory and doesn't get equipped, right? Yep, doesn't get equipped. Okay. Go back to the baseball bat. Okay. Well, skins is pretty self-explanatory. You just view what skins are available. Okay. Can sell it. Can mess with filters. Oh, select is what you actually use. Why doesn't it say equip? That would be what would make sense. Just say equip. But no, it says select. More importantly, why is there not a button for more information or anything like that? Now on gamepad, it gets slightly more wacky because the way you view skins is pressing the left stick, which is an odd choice. Obviously, you can go into this menu and get more stuff here, but why do you need to go into a separate menu to do all of these things? Unequipped slot. Okay, if I go back, that means the slot is unequipped now. Here's another fun thing. I'm using a gamepad now. The only thing I can do on this menu is scroll left and right between these hunters. I can't just go up, which is what I'm doing right now, and go into these slots and mess around with them. I can only do that if I'm on keyboard and mouse. I can just select it and go. If I want to do this on a gamepad, I have to go in, I have to press select on the hunter, and then I can start messing around with the loadout. Why? Why do I need an extra button press? Very easily could just go up into this thing and start messing around with the loadouts and such. But nope, can't do that. Gotta convolute things. Go back and find the shotgun I had her equipped with and re-equip it. Yeah, they've definitely done a number with this thing. Let's keep going because it gets worse. So you can select ammunition, then you can select ammunition. I don't know why you need an entirely separate menu for that. You can also get to it by clicking on that directly. Tools, same thing, same with consumables. There are loadouts. Now, these, you're only given 3 loadout slots. If you want to buy another one, it costs you $1. It's freaking ridiculous. Anyway. Oh, and by the way, if you want more than 5 hunter slots, that's going to cost you $1.50 per for a maximum of 75 slots. You can do the math on how much that would cost you. Anyway, like I said, this gets worse. So let's go into the skins menu here. Now, as you can see, we have the standard skin that you get just equipping the weapon. Then we have special skins. Now, these, you can see, have blood bond prices. That means you can buy them through the in-game shop. These say from the DLC whatever. That means that you have to go onto the Steam store and buy the DLC. You cannot just go to the store, find the DLC you want, and buy it in the in-game shop, because it has to go through Steam. So, weirdly enough, they also don't let you go directly to the DLC just by like double-clicking on it. You had to go into this menu, then go to that. Okay, $6.99, and then you would buy it, and it'll take you to Steam to do that. It's janky. I understand some of why it's janky, but still. But something else to remember here is that some of these options have blood bonds. So, go to store. What does that do? Well, it opens up pretty much the same exact menu, except it opens up all of the other stuff. It just highlights whatever it was I selected. So if I go back, it just goes back to this screen. Wasteful. Pointless. Why is it even there? Anyway. Now the only menu that things aren't messed up horribly in some way is the trait menu here. You double click on something if you want to apply it. It says apply trait, although the button for confirm, by the way, is enter on a standard QWERTY keyboard. Very dumb option. Nobody's going to do that, because that would mean if you're right-handed, you would take your hand off the mouse to press enter. Why do that when you can just click it? Again, pointless. If you're using standard WASD on a QWERTY keyboard, then F would normally be your confirm option, because that's going to be, or F or E, I should say, because those are probably going to be your interact button. I usually use F, because I got used to that a long time ago. But some people use E, or a lot of people use E, actually. Thing is, I got used to using lean left and right, and that's usually Q and E, so I use F instead. Anyway, this is all fine, but you can't just click and drag. You'd think you'd be able to click and drag into these various slots, but you can't. You can't drag away from them either. You have to click, 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 enter, click, enter. It's tedious. Now, something else they could improve here is that this is how you tell that something is equipped on your hunter in this list down here. You have this yellowish, not quite a full chevron, but a similar shape up at the very top. If you're just quickly glancing through these things to figure out what you want to throw on your hunter, it's pretty easy to miss that. So you might select something and it'll say you're already equipped, and you go to equip it, and it'll say, oh, well, do you want to remove the trait instead? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, never mind then. It's It's a bit clunky. They could definitely improve this, but it's at least this is mostly fine. And you have your filters up here as well, if you want to use those. I don't really think they're necessary. There aren't really enough traits to do it with. But anyway. This screen isn't as bad, but there's still just waste. Recruit hunters. Okay, cool. I click it. I click it. I click it. You have to double click it. Or, here's a crazy thing. You can scroll. Why is this a button here if you can scroll to it? It's unnecessary. Now, if you go into all hunters, that's all the hunters that you've unlocked, whether it's through DLCs or whatever. They all cost $100 to recruit. Free hunters are the ones where you can just pick one for free. They come with a loadout and a random trait. But anyway, as you can see, this is a bit clunky here. Things get even wackier once you start using a gamepad. You can press the right stick to show the grid. That just changes the size of the hunter buttons. That's it. That's all that does. And why are you slowly rotating? That's just kind of wacky. Well, okay then. Anyway, getting distracted during live commentary. What a surprise. Once again, selected, you have this chevron thing. It's actually even worse in the lineup because you can barely even see it. So if I have, say, Fergal over here highlighted, you can barely even notice that. Unless you know what to look for. But the grid here should be the default. It's cleaner, it's easier to see exactly what's going on. You don't really need to see the name of the hunter on the lineup page because their name is repeated up here. So why? And of course, you got 2 instances of the packed icon. You don't really need more than 1. I mean, if you shrink these down, then you can see it right there. This icon here indicates the presence of having packed marks that you can spend. But anyway, it's kind of janky. If I go into the actions menu here, then I can basically just do the same things I can do just by clicking on things, but I can see it having slightly more use from this screen in a gamepad situation, but even then, like if I do change equipment, that just brings me to the loadout screen. That's not helpful. It's easier if I just go and select the hunter and then select what I want to mess around with here. They clearly did not get anybody to test this, is the main problem. I mean, it's bad enough that it glitches out. I have a screenshot and actually have video of it glitching out. Quick interruption from editing DW. I'll be back to the live commentary in a moment. I just wanted to show you that clip of the interface absolutely going haywire on me. Because as you can see from the clip I'm showing you right now, it becomes basically unusable, and it's definitely something they need to fix. But until they put out an official update that actually fixes the problem for good, just understand that if this issue starts occurring to you, you can just close the game out and restart it, and that menu issue should go away. It won't make the menus themselves any more intuitive, but at the very least it'll remove the glitching. Anyway, back to the live commentary as I close out this bit on the UI. It's bad enough that it glitches out, but it's even worse that it's obvious nobody really tested this internally, or if they did, they shrugged and said it was fine. Because it just adds a whole bunch of unnecessary clicks, a whole bunch of non-intuitive button choices, both for keyboard and for gamepad. Some of them are just baffling. It's not pretty to look at either. I mean, you got this just kind of trailing off of the screen here. It's wasteful. Nobody likes it. In fact, it was such a poorly received UI overhaul that people just decided to throw tons of negative reviews at it on Steam until it finally hit mostly negative, and that was basically the day of the update, Crytek made a video saying basically that they heard the feedback and they are looking at making UI improvements. As if they weren't told for months when they were showing these UI changes off that the new UI looks terrible and that nobody wants to use it. And yet it launched, and now they act all surprised about this. It's baffling. If that doesn't tell you Crytek's development philosophy, I don't know what will. Now that said, is this interface unusable? No, you can use it. You can get used to it after a while. I've certainly gotten mostly used to it, but it's not a good interface. It's just indicative of all the same kind of crap that we see from AAA games in general. I mean, Modern Warfare 2022 and 2023 had this problem too, where it was just a whole bunch of unnecessary clicks, a whole bunch of unnecessarily sized buttons and things like that. It didn't look good. Nobody really liked it, but you got used to it after a while. Same kind of thing with this, I'm assuming, but hopefully they do make some changes to make this more intuitive and not as wasteful, because this is completely unnecessary. I mean, it doesn't even look good. That's the thing. If they were to make it look really cool and stylish, then maybe I'd be willing to let it slide, but since it doesn't even look good, it looks like a basic template. That they just took some template, applied it to the game, and called it a day. And yeah, I just can't abide by that. This is not good. So yeah, I hope that helped you understand if you were wondering what the hell was going on with the Hunt Showdown review scores on Steam right now, and why so many people are constantly complaining about the UI change. It's pretty craptastic, and the sad part is the original interface wasn't good either, but at least it wasn't this bad. I legitimately have no idea what is going through the UI UX designers' heads when they're designing this absolute garbage, and this is true for a lot of, especially AAA games these days, but even to a lesser extent AA and sometimes even indie games. It's like the industry has either collectively forgotten how to design user interfaces, or they're just outright deliberately designing the UIs to be as crap as possible. And again, it's abundantly clear they didn't have anybody internally testing it, or if they did have somebody internally testing it, they were basically a yes man the whole time. We're just saying, yeah, this is fine, even though they knew that people wouldn't like it, that it was a lot of unnecessary clicks, a lot of unnecessary button presses, just a generally clunky and unintuitive interface. And again, even though players of the game were telling them for months as they were showing off these various interface changes that the changes looked bad, they just went ahead with it anyway because, God forbid, a user interface and user experience overhaul actually take input from the user base. And honestly, I think that's the most infuriating thing about Hunt Showdown. It's Crytek's handling of the game. As immensely frustrating as the moment-to-moment gameplay can get, the real problem is that Crytek just doesn't seem to know what to really do with the game. They don't fix problems that have been in the game for years. I mean, people have been constantly complaining about hit registration problems, the servers having a relatively low tick rate and just not really being all that stable in general, the user interface being clunky and unintuitive, the lack of a centered point of aim, performance issues, glitches, and the entire matchmaking system, which seems like it just pulls whatever methodology it uses out of the ether and makes absolutely no sense. I mean, hell, the entire time I was playing this game prior to the big update, I was still firmly locked at MMR rating of 3, which is right in the middle of the pack. The max is 6, the minimum is 1, and yet I hadn't successfully extracted with a bounty from a single mission until the update came out, and even then it took me another 2 hours before I finally managed to successfully extract from a match. And yet, the entire time I have played this game, my MMR has been
firmly locked at 3. I have absolutely no idea what the hell determines your MMR in this game, because it seems like it's a completely arbitrary number and it just matches you with whoever it feels like doing so with. I mean, I look at the team statistics page after finishing a match, and the MMRs of every match I'm in vary wildly from 1 all the way up to 5, and again, I have no idea what goes into these kinds of calculations, and why the matchmaking just keeps throwing me into whatever matches it feels like without ever seeming to move my MMR at all. Those kinds of things have just been constant complaints from the community. They keep asking for more clarity, they keep asking for more positive changes, they even suggest positive changes, and Crytek just either ignores it completely, or if they do implement a change, it takes them potentially years to do so, and in the process they're going to break about a half a dozen things in the game and need to fix them over the ensuing months and or years, if they ever fix them at all. I mean, hell, those hit registration problems I mentioned, the supposed fix they implemented for that was to make the matchmaking a bit stricter and make it so that it factors ping into its considerations more. That's it. That's all they did. They haven't gone into the netcode to optimize it more, which you'd think they would be able to do with this big engine upgrade, but apparently not. They haven't gone in and improved the server infrastructure. They haven't gone in and improved the tick rate on the servers. They just shrugged, blamed it on the players, and implemented a completely half-assed fix, in massive air quotes, that did barely anything at all. Because generally speaking, you weren't being matched with players that had high pings anyway, unless you were playing at really odd times or were basically playing on the wrong servers. And the hit registration problems still happen even when you are playing in a match with all players that have low pings, because the issue is primarily in the netcode and server infrastructure, not on the player's end. I mean, hell, it's a pretty common occurrence for the servers to just completely crap out and make it so that you're just constantly rubber banding all over the place, even if you have a good ping to it. And then you just have to make your way to the exit and hope that the next match doesn't have a server problem. Then, of course, there's the whole can of worms that is the cheating debacle. Now, a lot of people say that cheating is absolutely rampant in Hunt Showdown, and based on what I've been able to play the game thus far, I haven't really encountered anything that was obvious cheating. No obvious wall hacking, or ESP as they call it these days, or aimbots or anything like that. Now, the worst I ever really managed to encounter was slightly suspicious stuff at absolute worst, and it was never anything that couldn't pretty easily be explained as either just being outplayed, or netcode and server infrastructure related issues, or of course just general technical problems. Now, obviously, that is just the experience of a single player, and I'm not going to say that there aren't any cheaters in Hunt Showdown. There definitely are at least some cheaters in Hunt Showdown, but from what I can tell, it's not really any more or less than any other multiplayer game these days, because it's a problem industry-wide. And obviously it's going to be a bigger problem in an extraction shooter versus a standard first-person shooter like Call of Duty, for example, because there are actually stakes in an extraction shooter. You stand to lose something if a cheater manages to drop you from across the map with a single headshot through 30 walls or something. So while the number of cheaters in Hunt Showdown may not be any more or less than any other multiplayer game right now, the perceived problem is considerably worse because of those stakes. Hence the community constantly begging Crytek to do something about it, and yet Crytek goes for months, sometimes even years, before fixing known exploits, and their stock response for anyone complaining about cheaters is saying, well, just submit a cheater report and we'll take a look at it, and if it's legitimate, we'll ban them. And yet, despite players submitting reports, often even with video proof of people cheating, and yet nothing seems to come of those reports. Sometimes cheaters get banned, certainly, but other times they can continue cheating for weeks or months even if they're doing it very blatantly and still not get banned. And that's resulted in the common perception that Crytek just doesn't care about a cheating problem in the game. And that, coupled with the lack of response they generally give on any kind of issues that people are having,
has led to a general perception of Crytek not really caring what their players think. And when you combine that with how long it takes Crytek to actually address the game's issues, with how many decisions they make where they clearly did not take the fans' thoughts into consideration and just went ahead with decisions anyway, with how they always seem to make one step forward at best per update, and then take a giant leap backwards by excising substantial amounts of content from the game, including maps, modes, and more recently, the complete removal of any kind of single-player content as well as the lore, it all just results in the experience of trying to enjoy Hunt Showdown being an absolutely infuriating exercise. Because there are things in it that are really cool. It's got a great setting. It's got really cool lore. The guns that you get to mess around with are really cool. The environment and the general visual design of everything is extremely well done. It's got a lot of character, and yet it has been plagued with issues since launch, and Crytek seems either unwilling or incapable of fixing them, and actually allowing this game to reach the heights that it really should. Because the game does have a lot of really cool elements, and when those are allowed to shine, the game can actually be really enjoyable. And yet, not only is it always prevented from reaching the heights that it should be able to reach by all these myriad problems, many of which have been in the game since the beginning 6 years ago, and yet, the way Crytek has been handling the game, you simply can't be confident that those issues are ever going to be fixed, and that it's ever going to be a truly fantastic experience like it has the potential to be. And think about it this way. Back when I originally played the game, it felt like it was trying to do everything it possibly could to make me miserable. Like I just wasn't allowed to have fun with it. Now we get to the 1896 update, and some of the changes they've made make me feel like I actually have a chance now. The centered point of aim, the change to the gunplay, particularly with the way the headshots work, and some tweaks to the gameplay mechanics, including a few extra traits that make solo play much more viable, although it's still pretty miserable to play, honestly. It all makes me feel like the game is no longer actively trying to prevent me from having fun with it, but there are still lingering issues from back when I originally played it that still spring up every so often and are still incredibly annoying. And now, even though I have managed to play the game for quite a bit now, and have managed to get successful extractions, managed to level up and unlock a bunch of stuff, the game is in arguably a worse state now than when I originally played it, just because they've removed a big chunk of the game's content, all of its lore, and all of its single-player content. So now, even though I feel like I actually have a proper chance at reviewing it, I actually don't want to review it in its current state, because the 1896 update, as nice things as it did bring to the game, removed enough content that it makes me feel like I'm playing a damn beta instead of something that's actually been out for 6 years now. I legitimately cannot think of another game that gives me that sensation. The idea that it went from being a finished, fully released product to suddenly being back in a beta or alpha stage. It's such a substantial step backwards right now that it feels like they're almost developing the game in reverse. It just doesn't make any damn sense. And the absolute worst part is, I want to like Hunt Showdown, because again, it does some really cool things. It's got a really cool setting, it's got cool lore, I really dig westerns in general, and there are so few western games out there that a game from a major studio like Crytek being a western game is enough to make me at least interested in it, and they've done enough cool things with it that I legitimately want to like Hunt Showdown. But as much as I want to like it, Crytek just constantly interferes with my ability to like it. And at this point, the only thing I can really say to Crytek is hopefully something they will understand. Because for everybody else has been constantly telling Crytek to pull themselves together and fix their shit for years, maybe they've just been saying it in the wrong language. So you know what? Let me just convey that message to Crytek in a language they will hopefully understand. German. Reißt euch zusammen und repariert eure Scheiße. It's the exact same message that the fan base has been telling them for years. Get your shit together and fix your shit, but maybe it has a better chance of getting through to them if you say it in German. All I know is that the problem with Hunt Showdown is not really the game itself. It has its own issues, don't get me wrong. The real problem is Crytek, the way they've been handling it.
For years now, they have just seemed far more interested in selling people cosmetics for the game rather than actually fixing the game's problems. And now that they have finally put out a substantial update with features people asked for, they've gone and removed large swaths of content, replaced the already fairly crappy interface with something that's far worse, and in their attempts to improve the technology, they've gone and broken half a dozen things in the game, some of which are pretty severe problems, and they've rendered the game effectively unplayable for people who were on the lower end of the system spectrum anyway, who were previously able to play the game and now can't. And because it's Crytek, we just have absolutely no idea if it's going to be weeks, months, or even years before it manages to get fixed and the content that they have excised gets put back in, if it even gets put back in or fixed at all. This was their big opportunity. They rebranded the game, they effectively relaunched it, and yet it's still plagued with many of the same problems it's been plagued with for years. It's just immensely frustrating, especially for somebody like me who has been craving Western games for a long time and only gets one or two trickled here and there, with Hunt Showdown being one of the big prominent ones, and just when they implement changes that make it possible for me to enjoy the gameplay, it comes with all of these other downsides. That's just oh, it's immensely frustrating. Anyway, that's the update for Hunt Showdown 1896, the 2.0 update, whatever you want to call it. It's a mess. I mean, it does some good things, don't get me wrong, but that UI is atrocious, the technical problems are serious and need to be fixed, and the outright removal of significant amounts of content and the complete removal of lore is just not acceptable. And the worst part is, I have absolutely no idea when I will actually be able to review it, because in its current state, it is now basically regressed back into being a beta again. And honestly, I don't even know if I want to wait around for it to get fixed. Pretty much everybody I know who was playing the game previously has stopped playing it, and a lot of that is because of how Crytek has been handling it. They haven't been fixing its issues, they've been continuing to shove more and more cosmetic DLC into the game without actually addressing the problems that it has, and so most of them have just gotten sick of it and have moved on to other things, and I can't blame them. Crytek has been doing one thing really well with this game over the years, and that has been pushing people away from it. And while the game is cool enough for me to want Crytek to pull their shit together, fix the game, and actually be able to pull people back into it, the cynical part of me looks at their history and says, no, they're probably never actually going to pull themselves together and fix their shit, so what do I even do with this? The only thing I can really do at this point is just keep an eye on it, see how long it takes them to fix its issues, and see if they ever manage to put the lore and any kind of single-player content back in. So if they manage to pull their shit together with this game, then I might end up doing another video on it. Hopefully it would be a proper review this time, instead of just a video that rants about how infuriating the game was, and then another video that talks about the update, and even though it brings some positive changes, it's still infuriating, but in somewhat different ways now, and it's just especially frustrating in Hunt's case because I legitimately want to like this game, and I want to be able to recommend it to people, but I just can't right now. And it is just downright infuriating. I can see it right in front of me where Hunt Showdown could be great and I could recommend it, but I just can't because Crytek keeps fucking up. I mean, it's even down to some of the simplest stuff, like not releasing detailed patch notes, or for extra hunter slots behind the first 5, they want you to pay $1.50 extra, like the 20 or 30 bucks you pay for the game itself apparently isn't enough for more than 5 friggin' hunter slots, or an extra $1 for every loadout slot past the first 3. Of course, that's assuming you even use the loadout system at all. I certainly don't, because there's not really much point in it, but still, it's just, oh, it's frustrating. Anyway, I am done ranting right now, and this video has ended up taking way longer to put together than I thought it would, and ended up being way longer than I thought it would, so sorry about that. But now that I've got this video on the 1896 update for Hunt done, I'm going to move on to some other projects. Again, I will keep an eye on Hunt Showdown to see what kind of updates it gets. And now that it's got the center point of aim, I could actually play it, so I might keep it on my drive and keep messing around with it every so often, but who knows how long it'll be before I end up revisiting Hunt Showdown on the channel. In the meantime, I'm going to get back to working on other projects. Hopefully I can find something in the near future that I can just recommend to pretty much everybody without any kind of reservations, except maybe just pick the game up on sale if it happens to be shorter or something like that. But obviously, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that before I've actually messed around with the game, so it's always something of a crapshoot there. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. If you like my videos, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's fine, I understand, but the option's there if you're interested, and every bit really helps out. You'd be amazed how even $1 a month can help out. Anyway, thanks again for watching, thanks for putting up with that long rambly mess of a video, and I will see you all in later videos.